Hey everyone, Chris here. Welcome to The Last Dinosaur, episode 64. Today we're joined by Ronald Spithout from OneHealth by VIKAND. In this episode, we dive into how digital advances are transforming seafarer health and safety. Stick around to discover the future of maritime healthcare. If you enjoy the journey, please show your support with a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice. Now let's dive in. Welcome everyone, and you are listening to The Last Dinosaur, and I'm your host, Chris Aversano. Today's guest is Ronald Spithout, MD of OneHealth by VIKAND. VIKAND is a leading expert in global medical services and risk mitigation solutions for the maritime industry. Their OneHealth approach unifies preparedness, prevention, detection, response, and management across a range of healthcare concerns, from communicable diseases to chronic illnesses, mental health concerns, and more. Ronald, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Chris.
Well, thanks for coming on. I always love to start off a podcast by starting off, what people are doing within their company. So tell us today a little bit about, VIKAND and really what you guys are doing with the One Health line, which you are heading up.
Well, I will start with the beginning. Although VIKAND is not a very famous name for many people, we are a pretty large company and we are in existence for well over 15 years. And most of those 15 years, we have been providing medical services on cruise vessels. So if you go on a cruise vessel, there's a good chance that the doctor and the nurse and the medical equipment and the infirmary and everything and the X-ray machines and whatever are run, owned and operated by VIKAND. So that is what VIKAND does. We are a healthcare company. We have doctors and medical professionals on about 45 countries in the world. I think in total, there are about 450, 500 that we employ. And that is what we are doing. Myself, I'm an engineer from background and I come from the satellite industry. So I've been running the Inmarsat Maritime business for a long time and retired from that a couple of years ago. And trying to retire, in which I failed, I ran into Peter Hult and we were talking purpose in life. And together we found a purpose, which is the use of technology to provide a better set of circumstances for crew at sea. And that is where we found each other. So while he's running his healthcare company and I'm coming from a pretty long stint in digitalization at sea from a satellite and engineering perspective, that is where we found each other. So since the beginning of last year, I've been acting as the managing director for this portion of portfolio from VIKAND, and we called it One Health. And the reason we call it One Health is because we look at health from all kind of direction. And basically, you only have one health. And it doesn't matter whether it is the physical aspect or the mental aspect or the environmental aspect. It's all your health. When we were talking about this all, we had as a purpose or as a vision on how to digitalize the experience that cruise people have on board of a vessel when they go to a doctor. When you're talking about commercial shipping, there's no such a thing. There are only 20, 30 people on board of a commercial vessel. So it's impossible to put a physical doctor on each and every vessel. It doesn't pay off. But digitalization makes a lot possible, and trying to mimic the experience of the doctor on board, where you can go whenever you want and you can reach out not only to the doctor, but the doctor can also reach back to you and say, please come back tomorrow morning and we will talk again and I will see you, and things like that. That is what we tried to rebuild in a digital fashion for commercial shipping industry. So this is where digitalization meets healthcare. And that's what we've been doing ever since, and we are rolling that out over commercial shipping as we speak. What we did for this to start with is to develop a platform together with an app that allows any crew member to directly reach out to any of our doctors. And not only reaching out, but see him in the same way as we do. Because it makes a lot of difference whether you only have a voice or whether you have a visual. So in our vision, there must be a visual. You must have a video link with the doctor because the doctor can be much more efficient with his diagnosis. It makes a lot of difference whether he sees you, your color, your complexion, whether you're sweating or not, and whatever. So that is to start with. And then we started thinking about the proactivity of the service, that the doctor can reach out to anyone on the vessel again the next day until the issues are solved. And also the ability to team up with the captain or the vessel command to be the medical buddy for anyone on board. So almost like a house doctor that knows you and sees you every time. So we are assigning teams to vessels so that when you call, you get the same person every time. So you're building up a trust relationship. So that's what we started, and that is what we are rolling out currently. And you know, this is about healthcare on one hand, of course, but it is also about keeping the crew healthy on the other side, because healthcare has a lot of faces, right? What currently exists in the maritime industry is a very rudimentary reactive way of dealing with crew health. So currently, if I exaggerate it a little bit, if you're ill and you can't handle it anymore, you go to the captain and he calls the SOS services. And that's the same whether you're mentally ill or physically ill. The only thing that exists today in shipping is a kind of a last resort, right? And then you call. And then a captain has to make a judgment call between his limited medical knowledge and his commercial wallet, because all those services are paid by the minute. And that's what you have today. That is not a way to deal with an asset. You wouldn't do it to your coffee machine or your main engine either, because for those assets you have a preventive maintenance package, right? So thinking about that, we developed a set of services that are proactive in nature and preventative in nature, because it is so much cheaper and more efficient to keep people healthy rather than to interact when things are too late. As I said, you wouldn't do that to your main engine. You wouldn't wait until it breaks down and then repair it. You do preventive maintenance, so you make sure it never breaks down. Now, that is exactly the package that we developed for healthcare at sea. It is more cost efficient for people at sea, but it's also reducing risk at sea, because people that are not healthy, either physically or mentally, are making errors, and errors are costly. And if they are getting sick to such a point that they have to be repatriated, then the costs are hitting the fan, right? So we do everything to try together with the ship owner, manager, and the captain on board to keep the people healthy rather than only step in when they are already ill.
I think that the comparison to preventative, system maintenance is at some levels I'm sure people would say, well, that's really crass, we're not machines, but in other ways it's a very good way to kind of look at it. And certainly from a crew point of view, and my time as a crew was very very long time ago. I also sailed on ships that were coastwise U.S. flag, Jones Act, so we were never
Mhm.
that far away from medical attention, maybe a couple of days at the most, which made for a very different experience than what you're talking about with the crew today.
Yeah.
One of the things that has to change, and I want to get back to a few subjects, but one of the things that has to change, and maybe something that goes on your past background, and that's the connectivity of the ships to have this type of service and at the same time keep
But,
it
be,
cost
but
effective.
before you go there, Chris,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
like
yeah,
to
no,
hook on
love
to
it.
what you say that we are not machines, because no, we are not machines. But I use the word asset
Yeah,
because crew is something that you invest in and that is
absolutely,
there for a long time, and you
absolutely.
should preserve the value of the crew. And if they are with you for a long time, you spend a lot of training effort building up experience and on. So your crew is growing in value, right? And you should maintain that value. That is why I use the word asset, because that's what you do to an asset, right?
I'm in agreement on that, and I think that it is a positive. It is, there has a lot of positive connotations, and I think you see that shoreside as well, just in the maritime and non-maritime industry, where companies are starting to look at like, hey, we have to invest less so, let's say, in physical health because that's part of the program, but certainly the mental health, which we could get back to as well, because that's
Mhm.
that's has come into focus, a sharper focus over the last few years, especially around COVID and the stress going back to the sailors,
Yeah.
specifically for the stress of the sailors, whether it's not knowing they could even get off in a port just to pick up groceries and kind of walk around, or go home. We could talk about that in a second, but pivoting a little bit back to your background in the satellite technology, the one thing that kind of makes a lot of this work and tick is the connectivity. Talk about some of the changes that you've seen over the years in connectivity and just in general delivering digital products and how this can help deliver the product what you're trying to do.
Mhm. Well, we came from a long way, right? Your podcast is called The Last Dinosaur because the maritime industry is kind of the last dinosaur when it comes to adopting digitalization, as you say. And I started in satellite communication in the early 2000, 2001, 2002. There were hardly any applications on board by that time. That's not a long time ago, right? That's still in the 2000s. So you're right in that sense. But probably that was given by the fact that satellite connectivity by that time was mostly paid by the minute or the megabyte or the kilobyte by that time. You must have a very good story on digitalization by that time, were you to adopt an application that you didn't know how much data it would use. Now, those times are gone, right? So with the adoption of all kind of VSAT or Global Express in case of Inmarsat, where I come from, you are paying by the speed and not so much by the package, the megabytes. And that opened up the world of applications on board. If you look at the current landscape, there are so many operators. There are so many constellations, whether they are geostationary, whether or MEOs or LEOs, they're all there. They all come with very sophisticated technology to provide high speeds on board. From that point of view, there's no reason anymore why you wouldn't adopt any application that you would normally use on shore as well for use at sea, because it became less critical how much data it consumes, and you can much more focus on the outcome and the application of it. Yeah. So that changed dramatically. Of course, you still see very different varieties of satellite connectivity on board, and for that reason, really limited the data consumption on the visual on the application. So our video links are working from 256 kilobits and onwards, and that is very small. And most of the vessels say, well, that's nothing because we have megabits per second nowadays. But there's still a lot of vessels who don't have that, but they all have something like 256 kilobits, so it will work everywhere. That has been a recommendation for ourselves. But going forward with the ever upcoming speeds at sea on satellites, you will see even more video type of applications kicking in.
Kind of mentioned what was really funny. You mentioned, having a video call with sailors. Just the beginning of last month, I had to have a doctor's appointment. They couldn't fit me in on the regular schedule, so literally, my doctor is 5 kilometers from my house, and I had a video call with my doctor because they
It's
couldn't fit me in. And it does. I was, I guess, spoiled because I was saying to myself, "Oh, I should be in person." And would like to have taken, let's say, blood pressure and other things, but it kind of got the job done there. And oh, as you mentioned, video link, I thought about that. One of the questions I do have is kind of interesting. How much resistance to this? I always ask the question about change and the challenges that you have when you bring on a digital product, whatever it is, whether it's a routing service, whether it's some sort of technology to monitor emissions. What kind of challenges when you guys go into clients' offices do you see, especially as you're pivoting out of where you started, which is the cruise ship industry, and into more of the broader commercial? Are you encountering a lot of different challenges as you talk about the product and just in general about this?
I don't encounter resistance at all because you mentioned COVID earlier in the conversation. I think it is clear for everyone after COVID how important mental health and physical health of the crew is on board. So whenever I speak to ship owners and managers, I don't meet any resistance because they get it. They also get the story about preventive maintenance because that is natural to them for their normal assets. I don't encounter any of that. They all see that it is increasingly difficult to get people on board. So the job of a seafarer is not very popular today. We all know that the ICS is predicting that in a few years' time we will be 90,000 officers short, right? So for every ship manager, it is clear that it is better, cheaper, to keep the ones that you have than try to find new ones, because getting new ones is increasingly expensive and difficult. So that is one. Then also, the reactive way of dealing with health is very clear that we are losing far too many sailors each and every year. More than 10,000 people are losing their job each and every year because a PME is pointing out that there is a chronic disease of some sort. That could be hypertension or diabetes or whatever. Too many sailors are losing their job because of such a thing. Also there, it's much easier to maintain, monitor, and keep them on board than to lose them. But that is the current practice. And then back to COVID, where the mental health issue came up dramatically. If you look at the statistics, they are very bleak, right? Every year there are about 100 people losing their lives while doing their job at sea. But out of those 100, 15 are taking their own lives. And you can't make it more explicit than this. And every shipping company has encountered one of those in the past years, right? So if you're reaching out to a shipping company, explain them about preventive maintenance for their crew, whether physical or mentally, then it rings a bell instantly. It helps that you don't need to build a computer store for it. It can all run over an application over mobile phones. So not a lot of changes in terms of technology on board. So they instantly get it. That is where we are.
Certainly, seafarers retention comes up a lot. I had a few
Yep.
podcasts towards the end of 2023 where that
Mhm.
was brought up, not only internationally but domestically, with one of the U.S. Coast Guard admirals that I had on, and he said as he runs the seafarers, the seafarers kind of training and licensing side for the United
Mhm.
States. He said, we're going to have this huge shortfall of seafarers, and we'll get back to that in a
Okay.
minute. Because what I do want to ask you about is let me ask you about the other side. When you go on to ships and you speak to the sailors, I would imagine overall their general reaction is pretty positive. But I could also see circumstances just dealing with a lot of the last dinosaurs when I was sailing that maybe even this sort of thing could be met with a little bit of nervousness or a little bit of standoffishness, I guess, if that's a word. How do you guys? What's your experience recently with the seafarers on all of this?
It's a good point, because if there's any point of consideration that I often have to discuss with the ship managers is, do we allow our crew members to have the doctor in their pocket, in their phone at all times? Or do we maintain the current process where everyone has to go to the captain and notify him if he doesn't feel well? You can have both in our case, right? The application runs on the computer on the bridge if you want, or the application runs on an iPhone or any other tablet that is with the Seafarer. And I have to say that many are still choosing to start with the service while having it only in one central place, so that they are sure that everything goes via the captain. For many, it's still a step too far to allow every crew member to call the doctor whenever he wants. Well, I believe it's the best way forward, because there is a hurdle going to the captain, telling the captain that you don't feel well. And it is, in a way, removing a hurdle if you can give the crew members their own iPhone with the application on it so they can call the doctor. In our case, we don't mind. We rather have the crew calling us 5 times with a false alarm, right, than one time too late in that sense. Because when it's too late, when it's too far, right, then the costs are coming in for the ship owner. The ship manager allows the people to call whenever they want. We, first of all, can be much earlier in the intervention process in case something is building up, and that is reducing cost. So that is a very hot topic on how to introduce that service in commercial shipping. And that is maybe a little bit something of the last dinosaur where everything had to go via the bridge. And
you
of
know
course,
yeah, exactly. It's really funny. Sorry to cut you off because I did have this this idea of connectivity and for mental health, and you're expanding into physical health. It came up with a podcast that I had with Dr. Jason Zeidema.
yeah,
Jason is
I know him.
yeah, so if you know Jason, for our audience, he's a lot of seafarer outreach. He sits on a few different boards and very prominent, and he expressed a similar concern as you, is like, hey, with all this connectivity, people are worried that, seafarers will abuse it. And we were talking about slightly different things, or overuse it. But he said, hey, these are grown adults that you trust with ships, that you trust with cargo. They should be trusted with connectivity on the ships, and he was talking about, I think we were talking more about streaming, Netflix or videos, or whatever, or talking to your spouses or significant others, overseas, which is a part of the mental health aspect of it, of staying in touch and what you could do. So it's very interesting that this comes up in that format, because I
Yeah.
wasn't considering that at that point.
But think about this, because talking about technology and digitalization, right? So you mentioned satellite connectivity, which is just one of the topics of technology to provide this service, right? Data communication in general improved a lot over the last years. You can be much more efficient getting stuff over the air. The mobile phone triggered a couple of things. Not only the software business, where everyone could develop apps for phones and the likes of, but also a hardware business of wearables and stuff that communicates with the mobile phone. That is one of the technological aspects that we embrace. We can monitor and measure whatever we want nowadays on shore with your phone. So why wouldn't we do that on board?
Right.
And then you have medical science as a technology that improved. So a lot of the stuff that used to be life-threatening in the past is now kind of a manageable chronic disease, like diabetes and things like that, right?
Like, I mean, you could say, I was having this conversation with my kids the other day. You could even say, and I'm going to maybe a more extreme age, HIV/AIDS. I mean, I'm not, I don't want to get into to that, whether it's go on as a seafarer. But when I was growing up, in my informative years, in the, let's say, late 80s, early 90s, into the 90s, that was basically a death sentence. And now you talk about medical technology. It's not something you want to get, but you can manage it. And diabetes, the same thing, or any other disease. It was pretty much, you just rolled it and you went downhill, and maybe you had some prolonged care, but that was about it.
Yeah. And then neuroscience, we are using a lot of that as well. And also the hardware industry embraced it, because it became clear from a neuroscience perspective that everything you do in terms of sleep, eat, breathe, exercise, and see is having an effect on your physical and mental health. Sleep monitoring is an obvious thing that makes a lot of difference on someone's mental capabilities. And it makes a lot of difference whether you have half an hour of sleep more and efficient sleep, right, at the right times.
Yep.
And I know everyone is doing shift work on board of vessels, but still, sleep monitoring is an important ingredient in getting a mental strong crew member. But also sunlight, right? UV lighting or air purification. And all this stuff can be managed, it can be monitored, and it can be reported by hardware, wearables, use of the cell phone, and data communication. It's all technology that we are using over there. And I hope that gives you an impression of where we come from to keep the people healthy, right?
Well, like you said, it is an asset, and yes, companies. It sounds kind of cold, but it is a way to do it. And frankly, at the other way, you look at it almost in a similar mindset as a client, right? It always takes more money to bring a client in than it does to maintain a client.
Yeah,
And you could go back to basic economics 101, or entrepreneurship 101, that it's always that way. And taking that, to the step with the seafarers, I think you bring up a very good thing.
it
And,
is it is
you know,
something that definitely works from all kind of aspects. And if you are doing something like this, eventually you will find out that you're doing risk mitigation for your vessel. And
right.
if you do risk mitigation and eventually you show less accidents, injuries, illnesses, and whatever, eventually your premium for your insurance company will be affected by it as well, right? So it all works in the same direction, but it is a strategic decision that you have to take to say, I will try to make sure that I preserve the value of my crew at sea. And that's what we are in.
And it's really interesting, because you could say, you talk about the word strategy, and we hear a lot just in the industry in general about strategic decisions for shipbuilding and
Mhm,
using certain fuels. And
mhm.
what is it going to look like 5 years, 10 years from now? And that brings me to my next question, which I love to ask guests. And that is, the strategic decision to kind of invest in seafarers and their health, mental and
Mhm.
physical. That decision, like I said, is strategic. And it also goes to building out, like we talked about before, the amount of seafarers you have access to, because I've heard that on several different podcasts, on trade shows, that we are in for a real gap of qualified seafarers, not only just on more run of the mill ships, but certainly ships that require even more specialized training, LNG or ammonia. Who knows? That's all going to need specialized training. Pivoting a little bit here, what would you say to somebody who's considering a career path in the maritime space? And it can not just be seafaring; it could be shoreside as well. What would you say to that person?
We talk a lot about that. It's a great question. We talk a lot about that because all our doctors are actually mariners. All our doctors have been sailing, which helps us to understand a little bit what is happening on board, right? What you see, and one of the reasons that we have this shortage upcoming is that, in the past, when you backtrack it, in the past, whenever you were sailing, you would probably it would be very likely that your kids would be sailing too, right?
Right.
Currently, that's not the case. Even in the seafaring countries, like in the Philippines or wherever, people are going to sea to earn money to make sure that their kids are not going to sea. So that needs to be changed because otherwise, that shortage will definitely happen. I think we are reaching a tipping point. To be honest, I'm not negative. With me, the glass is always half full, actually. And the reason why I say so is over the last 5, 7 years, all the discussions on digitalization at sea were around ESG, whereby actually the S of ESG was kind of forgotten for a long time, right?
Yeah, everybody
All-
talked about the E and the S and the
Everyone
G. It
talked
was
about the
like,
E.
well,
It's all
yeah,
about
it's all of it. Right,
environmental and
right,
zero
right.
emission and low
Yeah,
carbon and whatever, right? And even the shipbuilders, right, have been geared up to make more efficient vessels that are greener and so on.
right.
Uh,
Yep.
the S has been forgotten for a long term. But actually, what we are doing now, right, is investing in the S. And I'm very happy to see that, for instance, the vetting agencies are rediscovering the S as well. You see a lot of questions in the vetting lists, the self-assessments, questioning about whether the crew got mental health training
Mm,
or mental health awareness training and things like that, which is part of our OneHealth as well. I think that currently you see an influx of applications that are all gearing up to allow the ship owners and operators to invest in the S much more than before. I think if we continue this trend, then there's still a good chance that we are kind of steering away from the massive shortage. The moment the crew are seeing that the circumstances on board are improving, that their connectivity on board is improving, that they can maintain a portion of their social life while they are on board, that their stints are not too long, so they can be part of the social life at shore on regular times, then I think that you will find more people coming to sea again. So there are a lot of initiatives coming on. I think if we have this interview 3 years from now, it will be much better.
But yeah, it's a really interesting discussion because there is that worry. And, it used to be you go out to sea, you kind of accepted that you were just going to be disconnected. But then again, everything was just a phone call, right? It wasn't this 24-hour connectivity. So you kind of realize that, oh, okay, well, I can't get in touch with them anyway. It doesn't make a difference. You weren't missing out on as much, or it wasn't perceived. So I think that that's part of the gap to overcome for
Yeah.
sure.
I think it's equally important that we are using technology to provide a social life on board as well,
Yeah.
right? It's one thing to provide a social life like via connectivity, so you know what is happening at home, right? But you're not only hearing the pleasant stuff from home, right? You're hearing everything from home, and you can only in a limited way intervene when you need to, right? So it's also important that technology we all provide is having a function in bringing people together on board again, so that they are acting much more as a social environment. And I think that's happening as well. As well, what we see, which didn't happen 2 years ago. This is how quick things are going. That is the use of the web and artificial intelligence and the likes of. So I see a lot of endeavors, and we have embarked on a working group ourselves as well to use artificial intelligence to create even more exciting preventive solutions where it comes to social and health on board. And that is something that we couldn't even dream of 2 years ago. So I really think that there are a lot of things that are currently at our disposal at sea that we can utilize to provide a much better life. Um,
That's super positive, and that's something really really good to hear. This has been a really fascinating discussion, and something that I you're putting a lot of things in a way that I haven't been thinking about yet. But one question I do love to ask people as we wrap up, and I've been given a lot of different answers. Surprisingly, some people when they answer this question is I'm actually writing a book. Some people when they answer this question is I don't have time for books. I listen to audiobooks or so on. So let me ask you, Ronald, what are you reading?
all right. Well, I'm a compulsive reader, Chris, and I just closed the year as everyone did for my company that I run. I noticed that I had 26 flights last year, so that is
Oh
every other
wow.
week. And most
Yeah.
of the time I'm reading on the airplane.
Yeah.
Well, there's one. The one that I'm reading currently is from Cormac McCarthy. It's called The
Oh,
Passenger.
okay.
It's intriguing. It's a book that starts with divers that are on their way to a plane wreck that is on the bottom of the sea, and they discover that there's one passenger missing from that plane, and
Oh
that's how the
wow.
book starts.
Oh,
Um, so I don't know how it ends. I'm halfway, but it is a very intriguing book. That's what
well,
I'm reading currently.
I know that author's name. I don't think I've ever read anything from him. I think he's wrote a few books that have turned into screenplays. So that sounds excellent. Maybe I'll pick it up.
You know, I'm in the Netherlands now here. I lived in London for a long time, but since a year I'm back in the Netherlands, and I'm living here on the border of a river. So you mentioned nonfiction. I read everything that has to do anything with the Romans.
Okay.
Uh, and just because the river here was the border of the Roman Empire at some point, and it was used to get the soldiers from Germany into the UK to attack the UK. And everywhere around the river here, you still find the remains of Roman fortresses if you look very, very hard. So I'm reading everything around that as well. But yeah,
For a short time when I lived in DC, outside of DC, and obviously a lot more recent history, but the U.S. Civil War.
hmm
I actually started to read when I moved back to Connecticut, the Northeast to Connecticut. I started to read a lot about the U.S. Civil War, so it was a similar thing because you could put it in perspective of, oh, okay, that's like right there, and things like that. Actually, I just bought a book about the Connecticut's involvement in the Civil War. And if you're listening at this point, there's no jokes aside, because Connecticut is a small state. It's not a one-page pamphlet. It's
right.
a couple of pages. So anyway, Ronald, this has been a fantastic journey through kind of the health, looking at the health of the seafarers, which is an
Yeah.
important topic. Because, like I've always said, and it's not necessarily a new or an intriguing thought, is without the seafarers, all this doesn't happen. All the podcast, everything else that touches it just doesn't happen. So I really, really happy to shine a light on the work that you're doing, and with OneHealth, and wish you continued success, and love to pick up this conversation in a couple of years' time as well.
Well, thanks a lot. It was a pleasure, Chris, and you summarized it well. And it's high time that all the ship managers start to realize that by maintaining their cruise experience on board, right, it actually brings them money rather than cost them money. And what they are doing by doing so is actually making the industry as a whole more sustainable. And well, that's what we are all trying to do.
Right, and bringing the S and the ESG to the forefront a little bit. Ronald,
Correct.
thank you,
Correct.
thank you very much for coming on
Thanks,
the
Chris.
podcast.
See you then. Bye.
Bye bye.